Today I wanted to talk to you guys about a rumor and leak which happened over the weekend concerning AMD RX Vega, which is the upcoming GPU architecture that many AMD fans who are enthusiasts have been waiting for their upgrade choice for their GPU, not wanting to go out and get the likes of the 1070, 1080, and 1080 Ti, which up until now AMD has not really had anything to compete with ever since like the Fury X came out. Since then they've come out with the 400 series and the 500 series, which are virtually identical, only really a few percent difference between those two GPU lineups. It really is a basic rebrand that AMD has done here recently. So a lot of enthusiasts who want to support AMD have been waiting for the RX Vega GPUs to come out. And this rumor all kicked off when Tech PowerUp updated their GPU database with a relative performance chart on the RX Vega page. Links to all of this is going to be down in the description below. And on this chart, they show the RX Vega being 5% slower than the GTX 1080 and 11% faster than the GTX 1070. So if this holds true, and if this is the top-end GPU in the Vega stack, I think a lot of enthusiasts would be disappointed by this unless the price is very competitive when compared to the GTX 1080. But to cycle back to what I just said, this might not be the top-end GPU in the stack from Vega. This may be one of the lower variants, assuming that they will come out with more than one graphics card in the Vega family. I would have to assume they might come out with maybe 2 or even 3 different variants on Vega, and this just might be one of the lower-end models and not the top-end SKU. Because recently AMD had said themselves that this will be competing with the likes of 1080 Ti and Pascal, so this very well may be one of the lower-end GPUs in the stack. Another rumor that came out over this weekend was a leaked TimeSpy benchmark, which showed a graphics score on an RX Vega GPU running along with an 1800X of 5,721. And as Guru 3D showed in their own charts here, we can see that the 5721 would be about 25% slower than a GTX 1080, which in that same benchmark with their graphics score would pull in 7,152, which would be a lot less performance compared to what the relative performance chart on Tech PowerUp was showing. But they also note that the GPU was only running at 1200 megahertz, which could have been an early engineering sample, and the final release version may actually end up being clocked considerably higher than that. If we were to assume that it was clocked at least 1400 megahertz like we saw on the RX 500 series, that would be about 17% faster than what we're seeing here, which would close the gap considerably between the RX Vega GPU and the GTX 1080, and then that's also assuming that this is the highest end GPU, which it might end up being the lowest end one, so that would just close the gap a lot. And if this was, let's say, the lowest end Vega entry, and it was competing with maybe about 9 to 10% slower than the GTX 1080, then I think that would be acceptable, considering that they would have higher variants that would compete with 1080 Ti and Pascal. Of course, a lot of people are going to question what is the validity of this test, and one of their own forum users had actually pointed out that the hardware ID of 687FC1 matched the exact one that was on the Doom Vega run that they did during a closed press briefing back in December. If you remember, I covered that story where there was a leaked video from this press briefing showing Radeon Vega running on Doom, and it was a little bit faster than an overclocked GTX 1080 at that time. So lots of things to consider here on whether or not you want to believe these numbers or not. And to go back to the whole 5% argument, I wanted to go ahead and crunch in my own numbers that I had already run a couple of months ago on the GTX 1080 here. So I went ahead and put in the RX Vega with some simulated scores where I just took my 1080 scores at the time and I went and calculated those at a 5% difference, just to give you kind of a visual aid as to where these two GPUs might line up if the performance were to come out at 5% slower. And this really is just a simulated run here. I wouldn't, don't put too much stock into this. It's really just a visual aid for you guys to take into account based on the benchmarks that I run here to show it 5% slower. So all of those considered, please let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I really think this should garner a lot of interesting discussion from people in the comments, and I do look forward to talking to you guys down there and hearing your thoughts on these numbers, and if they line up with the final release. If this was the top-end GPU in the stack, how would you feel about it being a little bit slower than the GTX 1080? And then, of course, some of you may think that this is one of the lower-end GPUs, or you might just think it's complete bullshit all the way around, at which point we could just have that discussion anyway. So I will see you guys down in the comments for discussion, and I will catch you next time. Ciao.